Okay, thank you everybody for attending today's webinar, Risk Management Strategies, Business Continuity Management and Disaster Recovery. I'm Kevin Aguano, I'll be your host. This is one in a series of webinars that we run roughly every 2 weeks throughout the year. This was a carryover. It was supposed to be at the end of 2021, but we bumped it into January 2022. So this is our first one for the 2022 season, so thank you for joining. We have quite an interesting presentation for today. This presentation will be hosted by Amber Howard. Amber is one of the senior consultants with Procept. She has a long history of working in business analysis, project management, and all areas around IT and business process delivery. Amber is an amazing resource, one of our popular speakers, very personable. I'm sure she'd love to get your questions. How we're going to run this today is in a moment, I'm going to be handing this over to Amber, and she's going to be working through her presentation. Near the end of the presentation, we're going to have time for questions. What I'd like you to do is, if you're on the web interface on the live call, just type your questions in the chat window or the questions tab, whichever you have available to you, as a place to store the questions along the way. And then at the end, we will open up those questions and Amber will take the time to answer them. If possible, depending on how many people we have going on the call, we may be able to unmute the lines and have you ask questions verbally too, if you would like. Okay, this session is being recorded. It doesn't record your webcams or anything like that. The only thing it records are the slides and the voiceover. So you'll hear Amber's voice and the slides in the recording. And if somebody wants to ask a question verbally, not just typing it into a chat window, but actually sharing your voice on the call and we unmute your line, that will be part of the recording too. So just full disclosure, if you don't want your voice recorded and shared on YouTube, then just type your questions in the chat window. Okay, so moving on. We're going to be starting in just a second with Amber. You do gain PDUs or professional development credits for attending this session as well. And for those, sorry, I got all my lines going crazy in the background. If you need professional development credits for the session, you can claim them as well. You would get, I believe, 1 professional development credit for 1 hour of training. So we will be providing codes for some of those where it's provided at a later time when we get the recording processed and uploaded to our websites. We will be providing a claim code that works for PMI. Some of the other associations don't use codes. If you think you can claim this for credits and you have questions, just reach out to us and we'll be able to help. Sales@procept.com, sales, S-A-L-E-S, at Procept, Procept.com. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. Amber, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone who's joined us for this session today. It's great to have you here. I'll just say a little bit more about myself to provide some background and relatedness. So I'm originally from New Zealand. I came to Canada when I was 10, which is why I don't have what some people consider to be the world's coolest accent. I have lived in Canada for most of my life, and I've worked in and around corporations for decades in both the for-profit and not-for-profit sector. I started my career in healthcare. My consulting company is working in healthcare right now, where I'm actually really proud to say we're working on one of the big Infrastructure Ontario projects, building a new long-term care facility out in Ajax, and numerous other projects. And this conversation today, I'm actually really excited for because it represents a body of work that's some of the work that I'm the most. It was one of the highlights of my career. So the time I spent working at Toronto Pearson International Airport and helping define the business continuity management framework for the airport. So I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you today, and just thank you so much for being here. So we started this journey, as Kevin said, a few months ago. We started talking about integrated risk management, and then we had another webinar. You can find those on our YouTube channel, where we talked about enterprise risk management frameworks. And we're actually going to start today just by touching on those, because they really do provide the context for the conversation we're going to have around business continuity management and disaster recovery, which are, as it said on the first slide, strategies for how to mitigate risk. Just wanted to kind of let you know where we've been, and for those of you that didn't have an opportunity to watch those first two webinars or participate in them live, you'd be more than welcome to check them out on the YouTube channel. So our objectives for our time today, well, we're going to review where we've been over the last two risk management webinars. We're going to define what risk management strategies are. We're going to define business continuity management and disaster recovery, as well as outline the steps to creating a BCM framework and understand the steps in creating a disaster recovery program. So this is kind of meant to be an overview at a very high level, but hopefully we'll have time at the end to maybe dig into some of your, if you have questions that are more specific to your context. I would love to hear from you if you can put in the chat and, maybe we get, what had you say yes to being here and spending your lunch hour with Kevin and I today? Why are you so interested in the conversation for business continuity management and disaster recovery? So again, just kind of the structure of the conversation. We're going to be reviewing where we were, discussing risk management, different risk management strategies that you can use, defining our terms. I'm a philosopher at heart, so it's always for me about defining our terms. How are we defining business continuity management and disaster recovery? We're going to be looking at the frameworks and DR programs, and then we'll have time at the end to answer your questions. So what is integrated risk management? Well, it's a set of practices and processes that are supported by a risk-aware culture and enabling technologies. Really, the philosophy behind integrated risk management is that it's important for us to have a common context and understanding. And in given where we are today in the world, right? I mean, I don't know where you're located for those of you that are joining the webinar live, and for those of you who are watching the recording later, it's the January of 2022, and we are now in what is here in Canada a fifth wave of COVID. All of our systems are being stretched beyond what they've ever had to deal with before, right? Risk is unavoidable and it's always present. And risk can be both positive and negative. And it really is. We're talking here about the effect of uncertainty on our objectives. So this conversation is pertinent, I think, to anyone, regardless of where you are in your organization, whether you're a startup or a company that's been established and around for a long time. Having the conversation about risk and having a common language to talk about risk is important. So IRM specifically was actually developed in 2016 by Gartner. They revisited the old GRC, so governance, risk and compliance, and enterprise risk management models, and determined that there were critical gaps in the models that they were using to manage and define risk at the time. IRM exposes those gaps and is about proactively monitoring, tracking, and implementing compliance. Gartner created a new framework to address both the high-level strategy along with the hands-on work that needs to get done day in and day out in organizations. You could think of IRM as an umbrella approach that bridges governance, risk and compliance, and enterprise risk management. So I'm not gonna, because of time, and I want to have time for questions at the end, I'm not gonna dig into each of these. For those of you that are more interested in this topic, I invite you to go watch the other webinar where we actually go through each of these parts of the model and talk at length about, how we utilize each of these in our risk management approach. I just wanted to kind of ground this conversation because really BCM, as I said, BCM and DR are risk management strategies. So we kind of have to understand where they sit in the big picture. Enterprise risk management is the process of planning, organizing, leading, and controlling the activities of an organization in order to minimize the effects of risk on capital and earnings. Really, ERM encompasses the high-level strategic work, usually involving the board of directors and senior executives. I mentioned earlier that I had an opportunity, so I spent most of my time when I worked at Toronto Pearson International Airport as a business analyst working and project manager working in their information technology department. For those of you that are like me, have a fascination with aviation, an airport is one of the coolest places to work in the world because it really is like a little city, and from a technology point of view, it's just so fascinating. And because of the work that I had been doing around helping develop long-term business information system roadmap, so looking where are we going out into the future with this business from a strategy point of view, and where are gaps, what's our current state in terms of technology, and what are the gaps to help the business achieve its goals. I got a really good understanding of all of the processes that are used to operate the airport across the entire environment. And that led to an opportunity to spend a year of my time seconded to enterprise risk management, where I got to help define the business continuity management programs. So there are many approaches and models to doing ERM. One possible model here was actually created by Software Engineering, the Software Engineering Institute. And this is a possible way and approach to how to develop an ERM system. Now, the focus of what's called Octave Forte, this model, was to give people, was around security risks, just given the nature of the work that they did. But really, each step of this model has key questions that help provide both context and a focus for the work. And again, in the second webinar in this series, we go through this in detail. So I invite you to check out both of those webinars. The other thing I wanted to say about ERM is not only do we have models for how to create an ERM program in our organization, but there are maturity models like the one developed by RIMS that help you manage and monitor the performance of your ERM system ongoingly. So if we look back here for 1 second, I'm going to go back for 1 second. So part of what we do in just looking at where our risks at, we develop response plans for each of our risks, right? Step 8. Well, in order to develop a response plan for risk, we have to understand what are the different strategies that we can use to mitigate risk. And we have to have a fun acronyms that we use to understand what these strategies are. Negative risks, those that are where we have unwanted impacts on our objectives, include, and the acronym stands for mitigate. So one of the business continuity management programs and disaster recovery programs are strategies that we can use to mitigate risk, right? So we've identified a risk to the organization, and now we're going to develop specific steps that we're going to take in order to reduce either the likelihood of that risk coming to fruition or the impact to the organization should it come to fruition. The first A stands for avoid. So it could be that once we've done our risk assessment and we've looked at the impact and likelihood of the risk, that we decide that this activity is just far too risky for the organization. Now, I want to say that this is always going to be inside of our risk tolerance. Different companies have different risk tolerances, right? If you think about examples like a startup, typically we think of startups as being more risk-friendly, whereas maybe the financial sector or other heavily regulated industries tend to be more risk-adverse. So these strategies are always going to be seen through the lens of our risk tolerance and risk appetite for our company. And if it's the case that based on that tolerance and appetite, we decide that this activity is just too risky for our organization, the strategy could be to avoid that risk and not take the action at all. The T stands for transfer. So one of the strategies for negative risk is to transfer that risk to someone else. And the way that most of us do that, you all probably have done that at some point in time, is through insurance, right? So anyone driving a car, people with life insurance, house insurance, we are transferring our risk, we're paying to transfer our risk to a third party. The final A in this acronym for negative strategies for negative risk is accept. So it could be that we identify that there's a risk. Sometimes this is like regarding risks like acts of God, weather, things like that that are outside of our ability to do anything about, to mitigate. So the action is still valuable to the company. We still want to move ahead with whatever it is, the activity that we're wanting to do, and we've identified a risk. There's nothing we can do to mitigate it, so we just accept that risk, and then we would monitor it. Positive risks are those risks that have a desirable impact on our objectives. Strategies for dealing with positive risk. So for the negative risk, you can imagine we're trying to avoid something happening. On the other side, with the positive risk, we're likely looking to create greater opportunities for that risk to come to fruition. So the first strategy we could use is called enhance. So we're going to, kind of similar to mitigate, we're going to take actions that will increase the likelihood or the impact of that positive risk coming to fruition. The A, like the A in negative risk, is to accept. Sometimes we just acknowledge that there's a positive risk there. We're not going to do anything about it. We're just going to let it be. And if it comes to fruition, it does. If not, it doesn't. S, similar to transfer on negative risk, stands for share. So in sharing a positive risk, we're looking to find a third party that we can partner with that's going to help us increase the likelihood of this risk coming to fruition. The final E in this acronym for positive risks is exploit. So if the enhance means we're going to take some actions to try and create the positive risk coming to fruition, under exploiting strategies, we are going to go out of our way to do whatever we can, putting considerable resources behind having that positive risk come to fruition. So it's important to have this conversation about different risk management strategies, because we're here now to talk about business continuity management and disaster recovery, which are both risk management strategies designed to mitigate negative risk. So what is business continuity management? It's a framework for identifying and organizing risks of exposure to both internal and external risks. And business continuity management includes disaster recovery, business recovery, crisis management, incident management, emergency management, and contingency planning. And we're going to dig into these over the next couple of slides a little bit more. So BCM is a holistic management process for identifying potential impacts from threats and developing response plans. The key objective in business continuity management is to increase an organization's resilience to business disruptions and to minimize the impact of these disruptions on our bottom line, on operations, on our ability to do, to achieve the vision, mission, and goals of the organization. Business recovery specifically, and I just want to make the difference, but distinguish between business recovery and disaster recovery. Business recovery refers to repairing damage to the company's ability to manage its day-to-day operations, whereas disaster recovery is a specific term used to referring to protecting, restoring, and maintaining IT or information technology operations. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the distinction between crisis management and incident management, crisis management is about events that take place over a longer period of time, relating to unstable or crucial or states of affairs for a business, whereas incident management is managing something that's happening right now in the moment. So we can think of, and a popular way of looking at business continuity management is like an umbrella, right? So under the umbrella of business continuity management, we have IT recovery, and business continuity. So how do we, right, given all of the different things that businesses do on a day-to-day basis, how do we first identify and understand what are those critical processes that need to happen in order for this business to operate at any time? And what are the levels at which our operations need to be continued, regardless of the incident, emergency, event, or disaster? How do we maintain our supply chain? How do we deal with crises like the pandemic that we've all been living through? I want to say something here about the approach to continuity management. So there are some approaches that say we're going to create plans based on specific events. So we're going to create a continuity plan in the event that we have a major weather event, or in the event that we have some kind of pandemic, or in the event that there is some kind of terrorist activity. So the approach to business continuity management in those instances is specific to event types or incident types. The approach that I was trained in says we want to understand what are the core things that we need to do and the levels at which we need to do them, regardless of the incident that we're dealing with. Now, there may be some unique things about different types of incidents or events or disasters, but we want to understand what is critical to the operation of this business, regardless of the event type. And that was actually the approach that we took when creating the business continuity management framework for Toronto Pearson International Airport. So the highest level, we have whatever planning methodology that we're using for business continuity management. I'm going to offer you a possible framework to use today. And then once we've identified all of those things, then we need to create specific plans in order to be able to ensure that our business continues to operate above the threshold that we said it needed to operate in order to maintain our cash flows, in order to maintain our reputation, in order to be able to continue to serve our clients and our customers at whatever levels we say they need to be served at. We're going to dig into these a little bit more, but first I'm going to create, right? So how is disaster recovery distinct from business continuity management? Well, disaster recovery is a subset of BCM, right? Specific to information technology. Given the world that we live in, we cannot separate what we do in the world, especially now on the other side of COVID. Information technology has become more vital than ever. Most of our employees, many of our employees are working from home. How we interact with, deal with our clients, even here within Procept, how we instruct and teach people and offer training has largely moved online, given the state of circumstances that we're dealing with globally. So disaster recovery is a set of policies, tools, and procedures that enable the recovery or continuation of vital technology infrastructure and systems following either a natural or human-induced disaster. DR focuses on IT and technology systems that are supporting crucial business functions, as opposed to, as I said, business continuity, which involves keeping all essential aspects of a business functioning regardless of the type of event. So a DR event, under the framework of business continuity management, a disaster recovery event, an IT event, would be a type of incident that would get managed by the broader program, and your disaster recovery program is going to define how do we deal with IT-specific incidents. And not just how do we deal with IT-specific incidents, but say, for example, we have a weather event, or we have a fire, or we have a security breach, we have a cybersecurity issue. Then what are the crucial IT systems and infrastructures, software applications, resources that are needed in order to maintain the system? So this image is a little bit busy, but I wanted to kind of show you an image that helps you understand kind of the big picture of how this works, right? So in every business, we're going along and we have business as normal, right? We have our normal operations, which seems a little strange to say in this day and age given COVID. We have our normal operations. During a pre-crisis event or before an incident hits, ideally, and to whatever level is appropriate for your business, you would be doing risk management planning, looking at safety and security plans, even, and we'll talk about this a little bit more under under business continuity management, testing your response systems. Now, some of you may work in heavily regulated industries where you know that part of your obligations for compliance are to ongoingly test your systems to make sure that they work in the event. So we're going along in our normal business operations, and then all of a sudden, we have an incident. Now, as I said, that could be a cybersecurity attack. It could be related to fire, or, for example, working in the healthcare industry right now, for those of you, I don't know if there's anyone here who is or who's listening, one of the things that we're dealing with in Ontario specifically, and I would assert probably much broader than just here in the Canadian context, is staffing challenges. And they're not just impacting healthcare's ability to be able to respond to the fifth wave of COVID, but on the construction project that I'm working with Omicron, many of the workers are contracting the newest variant of COVID and are unable to work. So who are your critical resources, right? And what are your plans to make sure that you have staffing at the levels that you need to be able to operate your business? So depending on the nature of the incident, right, we want to have initial incident management plans, right, that respond to the immediate threat. And then depending on how long the incident goes on for, we could move into what we call crisis management. So we have the incident management is about our initial response, and then we have our recover and resume and restore phases, in which our crisis management plans, business continuity plans, help move us from the incident into and back to normal operation. Now, I want to say something here from a risk management point of view about management reserves, because you want to imagine that no company, well, I don't want to say it that broadly, very few companies would have had sufficient plans to be able to address the kind of disruption that has happened and the length of the disruption that's happened during COVID. Every company that I do business with and work for has had to really dig deep and get creative and be innovative. And many companies we know have not survived the pandemic. So we can have the best of plans, and then sometimes things happen in life that are beyond anything any of us could have imagined or planned for. And in that case, many companies have what we call management reserves. Or if there's things this large, they've transferred their risk and they have insurance to be able to support them in being able to survive through the completely unexpected and unforeseen. What you could map onto this image in your mind would be that we have, if you look at the timing, right, when we go through the pre-crisis period, we would have whatever our level of normal business operations would be, and then depending on the nature or the size of the incident, we're going to experience a drop in business operations. It's just inevitable. If we didn't experience a drop, there wouldn't be a crisis to be managed, right? So we experience the drop. Part of your business continuity management program is identifying what is the minimum level of business operations that we cannot drop below. And then your business continuity plan is going to be designed that regardless of the incident that you're dealing with, now I'm making a caveat, as I said, for COVID and the pandemic, that under every other kind of incident that we could imagine, right? Your business continuity plan wants to be designed, should be designed in such a way that will keep your organization above whatever that minimum threshold you've determined. And as you can imagine, that is going to be different for every organization based on their goals, their activities, what they're committed to. So why I love BCM and DR. This is a picture of Toronto Pearson International Airport. For those of you that don't know, you might be interested to note that darker spot in the asphalt or the apron is actually, so what you're looking at in this image, for those of you that are unfamiliar, is Terminal 1 at Toronto Pearson, and that darker spot on the apron is actually the old Terminal 1. So in order to maintain operations of Toronto Pearson while they built this brand new massive terminal, they wanted to maintain operations for as long as they could. They kept operating Terminal 1, and then they tore the building down later when they were ready to do so, and they can finish the construction on much of the rest of the building. And it turned out that they got the mix of the colors for the apron a little bit off, so you can actually see the old footprint for the old terminal next to the new one. Having the ability, so for me, why aviation and my time spent in aviation was so foundational and so important to me is I'm really committed to people having love, connection, and belonging in their life. Kind of as like at the foundation of everything I do in my training, my coaching, my consulting. And airports connect people. They connect loved ones, they connect family, and they also connect resources, economies. They allow us to have, Amazon deliver our package in a day. Being able to help create a framework and implement the framework that would allow this airport to continue providing that for people across Canada and in the Toronto area and in Ontario and across the world, really. Toronto Pearson is a hub, so it connects people to lots of different locations. Really was, as I said, one of the highlights of my career, so one of my greatest joys. And it was fun. I don't know if you can, have you ever worked on projects or been involved in work that was very rewarding and at the same time very fun? So I told you that we were going to spend some time talking about the steps to create a business continuity framework. Now, this is one possible model that you could use based on my personal experience in aviation. And I believe that following these steps would allow you and enable anyone to really start to build a powerful framework for looking at continuity management, regardless of the industry that they work in. So the first thing we want to do is identify what are our critical processes. So what are the things that we have to do in order to maintain the ongoing production, creation, delivery of the goods, services, and products that we provide to our customers and our clients? And what was so beautiful about the work that I did at Toronto Pearson and what we created at Toronto Pearson is we were able to create at the highest level a very simple framework. When you look at an airport, essentially airports do three things, right? They move passengers, they move baggage, and they move airplanes. Now, the massive complexity in doing those three things is hidden underneath all of that, but at the highest level, those are the core things that an airport must do. And then from there, we were able to identify, well, what are the critical processes? What are the things that have to happen in order to move a passenger? What are the things that have to happen in order to move baggage? So after defining the critical processes, the next thing you want to do is go on and define the support services. So what are the resources, the people, the tools, the connected services that are required in order to ensure the ongoing operation of that critical process? What are the underlying infrastructures that are required, either in terms of assets, like physical assets, if you have some kind of brick and mortar, or your operation requires a supply chain? Well, they all require, most require a supply chain, but I mean, you have a physical location. What IT? So this is where we start to, right? The support services and the underlying infrastructures help us to drive out what are the key IT systems? What are the, perhaps, what are the critical end user devices? Which roles in the organization are critical? Maybe in the absence of some kinds of technology, so for those of you that have traveled to the airport, you walk in and there are flight information display screens as soon as you walk in. Well, what happens if those screens go down? We still need to be able to, it's still critical to be able to communicate flight information to passengers. Oh, well, if those screens go down, we need a person, a body to be able to stand there and communicate that information to passengers. Well, where are we going to get those resources from? Well, perhaps we have some resources, depending on the type of incident that we're dealing with, that don't need to be doing another job, and we can move those people to be able to take care of this, right? Now, that's all part of the plan and sub-plans that you would get. I'm just kind of trying to walk you through understanding the critical processes, supporting services, and underlying infrastructures will help you get to the point where you can develop specific business continuity plans and sub-plans. You also really want to determine, as I said, what the minimum level of business operation is. And then at the highest level, right? And then how does that get expressed in each of these underlying critical processes in order to have the business function? Once we understand what all of the critical processes are, the supporting services and underlying infrastructures, right? So for us at the airport, those underlying infrastructures also included fire and emergency, right? So our ability to respond because of, so if you're a heavily regulated industry, that's also going to inform the critical processes and supporting services that you use. Once you've identified what it is that you need to protect and maintain and manage, and the minimum levels at which you need to do that, then you can do the work to develop your high-level business continuity plan and all of the sub-plans that allow you to actually keep your operation above that minimum level. Now, there are many other pieces. We're kind of talking here at the high level about how to create a framework. You know, there are pieces involved and related to, well, how do you, what's the management process that you're going to use to maintain your program over time? How do you elevate and improve your program, right? Maturity models, RIMS has a part of their maturity model, and under RIMS for enterprise risk management also speaks to components of business continuity management of the mitigating strategy. But one of the funnest things I think about business continuity management, and I was able to do this both in the aviation industry and in healthcare, is exercising. So once we have our program in place and we've developed all of the plans, you've probably all experienced like a fire alarm test. Many companies do that when we used to be in the office together anyway. That's all part of testing the continuity management and the safety and security systems of an organization. So when I worked at the airport, we would have massive scale, and maybe some of you've heard of them or you're aware of this, but airports will have massive scale exercises that they do yearly in order to test different elements. And they're actually regulatorily, we have regulations that require us to do this. So, what happens if there's a plane crash? What happens if there's a sniper in one of the terminals? What happens if there's a massive weather event or a loss of electricity? So we would do both tabletop exercises to test the business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans, as well as large scale with people. We would have volunteers come. They would get makeup done if it was a plane crash, to really create a realistic simulation of and then what are your lessons learned? So I say all of that because I want to illustrate that we're talking here just kind of about the beginning steps to creating a BCM framework, managing your continuity program, and perhaps we can have that conversation, Kevin, if that's something that would be of interest to people. What are the different elements of managing an ERM program or a continuity program? But there's way more to managing continuity than just creating your framework. So where do we start in developing a disaster recovery program, right? So we start with the BCM plan. Our business continuity program plan is going to let us know what are all the critical processes, and then what are the IT, and then we can look from there, what are the critical processes, infrastructure, and solution support services. Then we can start to look from there to say, well, what are the IT systems that support those processes? What are the IT systems and infrastructures that are required? If we've identified that paying people is a critical process, and I promise you it is, right, for almost every business, paying people is a critical process. What are the IT systems and infrastructures that are required in order to maintain payroll? So as I said, the DR plan is a subset of the business continuity plan. The scale of your disaster recovery will depend on the size and type of business that you're in. Typically, as I said, heavily regulated industries require more stringent business continuity and disaster recovery planning. And it will all depend on the level of risk tolerance and the nature of the business that you're operating. So here is a possible approach that you could take to developing your disaster recovery program or your disaster recovery plan. So I'm going to start by assembling the plan. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, we want to identify, this is where we're pulling from the business continuity plan. What are the critical systems, resources, vendors, supplies, infrastructures that we need in order to be able to support the business? Because that's what IT exists for. it exists to empower the business and enable the business in order to be able to fulfill on its vision and mission. So one of the most important steps in your disaster recovery plan is appointing emergency contacts. So it's actually part of the disaster recovery team when I worked at the airport. So if there was events or incidents that happened, for some of you may remember many years ago, we had a massive flood in Toronto that actually impacted a number of the server rooms at the airport. And so we were there for days looking at and applying our DR plan. How do we get those services back up? And we learn, right? Every time there's an incident, just look for yourself, for those of you that are on this call, how many have you learned so much over the last 2 years through this pandemic that you can use to apply to your business or your organization and make it stronger and more resilient over time. So I want to appoint the emergency contacts. What's that call tree going to look like in the event that there's emergency? Part of this is thinking through. Like, do you need 24-hour support for this business? And if there are incidents that happen in the middle of the night, then who's going to be on call? And how do we get a hold of people? And how do we manage people's vacation time and time off and all of that? You want to assign different roles and responsibilities. So in my experience, one of the things that we did is we had different teams. So we had kind of like the architecture and infrastructure team, right? So they were responding to any outages in our underlying fundamental infrastructure to support applications in the environment, right? But once you understand the critical processes for the business and the support systems or the support services and the roles that are critical to operate the business, then you can start to look from, well, what are all of the IT systems that are required? And then you'll create teams that make sense for your business. So we had kind of an interface that was working with the overarching incident management response team. And there was someone from IT who would sit there with that group, feeding information that was relevant, because sometimes the incidents we were dealing with were not just an IT incident, but a broader airport incident that had an IT impact. Perhaps it is just specifically an IT, like that. Thank you. Possibly parts what's driving it is an IT outage, but then there's going to be knock-on impacts to other parts of the business, right? We want to make sure that we understand, like we have clear data backups. We understand we're asking the right questions too, is another thing you want to say as we go through this development of the plan. So when you're talking with your clients about what their needs are, do they need the system with all of the data back up and running as soon as possible, or do they just need the system up? And whether you have the historical data or not is not as important. So you can imagine for a financial department, making sure you have perfectly accurate historical data is very important. But for that flight information display system that I was telling you about, well, we don't care about what happened with the flights in the past. We want to know, we want to display the current information about what's happening with flights right now. So asking those right questions will help drive out your data and backup solutions. Who are the people involved? What needs to happen in order to be able to restore the technology functionality? So working with your vendors to drive out all of those different potential subplans. And then finally, testing and maintenance. So we don't just create the plan, but we're ongoingly testing the plan, testing our ability to respond. Do people do what they're supposed to do according to the plan? And making updates to the plan ongoingly as time goes by. All right, we've covered a lot in the last hour, so now I'm going to turn it back over to Kevin for anyone who has any specific questions, and I'll do my best to answer them as well as I can right now. And then, of course, we can always follow up with you after if the response requires more information. So, Kevin, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Amber. What a great presentation. Okay, everybody. Here's your chance to ask questions now of Amber and take advantage of her expertise. You can type your questions in the questions window, which a couple of you have already done, or you can type your questions in the chat window. If you feel brave, you can click your raised hand icon and I will unmute your line and you can ask your questions verbally of people on the call. Also, we have the opportunity here for you gaining some PDUs. And remember, those professional development credits or continuing professional development credits can be claimed by you under various categories. This session will make you eligible for 1 hour's worth of training, which normally counts as 1 professional development credit in most programs. Okay, we have a comment from Shay. Shay said, interested in enhancing the current program. Not sure what that means. Does that make sense to you?
So, well, I'm going to go with what I think I hear, and then maybe you can let us know. So, if you have an existing enterprise risk management or business continuity management program in place, and you're looking to how do I elevate that, then one of the things that I would say is you want to look at what are the standards, right? So, finding some kind of maturity model. I mentioned RIMS. That's the one that I'm most familiar with. There's also ISO standards around enterprise risk management and business continuity management. Because part of what you're looking to do is then, what are the best practices around this? What are we doing today? And really, if you're looking to enhance your program, you're wanting to get clear about, well, what are the goals of the organization as it pertains to risk management, continuity management, and what's that future state look like? I joke with people that all I ever do as a trainer, a coach, a consultant is future state, current state, gaps, solutions. That's literally my whole life. Do you want to understand what are the goals of the organization as it relates to the BCM or ERM programs or DR programs? Where are we today? What are the gaps? And how do you know what the gaps are? Well, that's where those maturity models and standards are really helpful.
Very good. Thank you for
that answered your. I hope that was what you're looking for.
Thank you for mentioning the ISO standards. Just as a shameless sales plug here, Procept does offer certification training for people interested in the ISO Business Continuity Management Certification Program at the practitioner level. So that is something, foundation and practitioner. So we do provide that training if anybody is interested. Okay, next question from Martha Klein. Should a BCM or DR plan be primarily built by the people at the bottom of the org chart who know what's really going on and what works, or from the top down to get strategic direction and executive support?
Well, I'm gonna split the middle and say both. So as a business analyst, I started my career as a business analyst. I train and I teach people business analysis now, and I say you want to gather requirements or information at all levels, right? Because to your point, Martha, the people at the top know what's the process as it's supposed to be done, or they think it's being done. And then there's all of the ways that people on the front line, individual contributors in organizations are changing processes in order to be able to find efficiencies or make things work with the limited resources and tools that they have. So I think you need both. I think you definitely need the strategic direction to help define the goals of the program. Why are we even doing this, right? And you really need to harness and work with the people who are doing the work to understand how things are being done day in and day out in the organization. And that's what's going to set your program up to have the most success.
Very good, thank you. Next question is from Khalid, I guess is how you pronounce that. Are there standard templates for any of this that we can use as a starting point for developing our own?
I don't know. I know we have templates in our, Kevin, but in our environment. I don't know if we have anything related to BCM and ERM. I'm sure there's templates that you can find online, or if you'd like to reach out to me individually, you can reach me at ahoward@amberhowardinc.com, and I'd be happy to share what I have with you, and hopefully that would support you in your journey.
Excellent. So ahoward@amberhowardinc.com. Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'll keep that. Next question from Gela, G-E-L-A. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I haven't seen that name before. Should cybersecurity events like ransomware attacks be part of the BCM plan, or should they have their own cyber incidents response plan?
So I would include cyber, in my experience when I worked in both aviation and healthcare, we included cyber as part of the disaster recovery planning and incident management through information technology. So again, it's all part of the broader conversation of business continuity, but it really, that would live with information technology.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amber. Any more questions, please type them in the chat window or the questions window. We've had some good questions. Here's your last chance to type away and ask a question of Amber while we have her on the line. We're approaching the top of the hour, so we've got time for maybe one more quick question. Okay, nothing popping up real quick. Okay, thank you very much, Amber. We really appreciate your time. I learned a lot in this session, and I really think this is something we should be thinking about more with all the extreme weather events and civil unrest that we're seeing and pandemics and all the other interruptions to our business operations. This is becoming more and more important. So I've made a bunch of notes for things that I'm going to do as takeaways from this session. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, everyone, to be with you today.